Today, we continue our discussion on lifestyle habits that support brain health. We are excited for the return of our incredible guest, Dr. Dale Bredesen, back with us again to discuss the positive benefits of exercise on the brain. Now, Dr. Dale Bredesen has spent over 3 decades researching what really happens in the brain as we age. His research has resulted in the publication of over 220 papers. He is also the author of 2 New York Times bestsellers, including The End of Alzheimer's. Currently, he is a professor at UCLA. Dr. Bredesen has pinpointed the critical lifestyle habits that support cognitive health and prevent decline. Today, we're going to discuss one of those 7 key habits, exercise. But before we get into discussing exercise and brain health, we want to quickly respond to the questions sent to us from our previous Facebook Live session about brain health and nutrition. One of our followers asked, I noticed PQQ is a quinolone. Is this the same quinolone as fluoroquinolones?
No, this is different. This is actually pyrroloquinoline quinone. And it is a different molecule, different type of molecule that has proven to increase the number of mitochondria. So therefore can be very, very helpful. And a lot of people like the idea of increasing mitochondria and therefore take some PQQ. Often they take 10 to 20 milligrams is typical for PQQ.
Great. Thank you for your clarification. Our next question is high or low HRV better?
Yeah, so what HRV is looking at is your ability to activate your parasympathetic system. In other words, your vagal tone. So are you relaxed? And if you're relaxed, your heart rate variability will be high. And you'll be actually going back a little bit, back and forth a bit between the adrenergic side and the parasympathetic, the sympathetics and the parasympathetics. And you can look at, there are nice online graphs. It will tend to go down as you get a little older. So, if you're in the 40 range, you should probably be up somewhere around 60, 70, that sort of thing. It'll come down so that people who are 60 and 70 are down more like 20, 25. But you'll see a striking change just when you do breathing. So, for example, I may see mine at 30 or 40. And in fact, if I'm under stress for something, it may be down at 15 or 20. Just 1 minute of deep breathing, it'll be over 100. And that is typical. When I first wake up in the morning, I check it and it's often 150, even 200 sometimes. So you will get a high heart rate variability when you have good vagal tone and you are relaxed. And again, it just shows you how helpful it is to do some deep breathing every once in a while. Even take a minute and do some slow square breathing, or some pulling in and then holding and then expiring slowly over a count of 7 can be very helpful for your vagal tone. And of course, there are many other things, walking in the forest, whatever you like, music, etc., that will help your vagal tone.
Great. That not only sounds really effective, but it sounds approachable for a lot of individuals. Anywhere, Absolutely. At any point, can you do that deep breathing? So great recommendation. And then finally, what about mold?
Yeah, that's such a good point. We first described back in 2015 and 2016 with papers on the different types of Alzheimer's. What we noticed, initially, we just had the first 2 types. The more inflammatory type and the more atrophic type. And we saw that there were people that didn't fit into either of those types. And they tend to look different, people who are having some cognitive issues. And they often will have a non-amnestic presentation. They often have some depression. They're often very young. And we ultimately found out these are people who'd been exposed to toxins. And one of the most common is mycotoxins, mold-produced toxins. This is a huge problem, one of the most common contributors to cognitive issues. And so we'll do a whole piece on this separately. This is now a whole field unto itself. And Dr. Richie Shoemaker years ago pointed out that mycotoxins could have multiple different effects, including he saw it in some of the patients with Parkinson's, and he saw it in some patients with cognitive decline. They were never further defined. And so we've found that, yes, you can see classical Alzheimer's, or often this kind of non-classical, but which is still Alzheimer's by scans, and which is related to mycotoxin exposure. There are 5 big ones, which are Aspergillus, Penicillium, Stachybotrys, Chetomium, and Wallemia. So those are the big 5 that you have to be concerned about. And everybody should think about having an ERMI score. This is from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, put out the ERMI score, or a HERTSME-2 score, which is another way of getting at the same thing, essentially, to know whether you're exposed to these important ones. Of course, there are lots of molds that aren't making these neurotoxins and immunotoxins, but unfortunately, many of us are exposed, especially if you live in a home or work at a site that has had some water intrusion. So this is an important area, and really important enough for books and for its own discussion. And of course, there are experts who have been trained by Dr. Shoemaker and others, like Dr. Mary Ackerley, Dr. Mary K. Ross, some of the experts in this area who have trained physicians who are specialists in this important area.
I'm really looking forward to this discussion on the, recently I found out I have Lyme disease, so I know that mold and Lyme go,
Yes.
hand in hand in not a great way, and I'm just hearing more cases of individuals struggling with this. So I think this will be really informative and beneficial for many individuals. So we will cover
great news
more.
Is that all these things can be addressed. That's the key, is that all the Lyme disease, mold, these can all be addressed. That's the important thing.
Fantastic. So if you are interested in hearing more about this, stay tuned. We are going to go more over on that topic during our upcoming Facebook Live session about detoxification and brain health. But now let's continue on our discussion about exercise and its impact on the brain. So, Dr. Bredesen, I know you wanted to discuss a recent publication in Nature regarding exercise and brain health. Why don't we start there? Can you explain more about their research findings?
Yeah, great point. So there was a group doing some beautiful basic research looking at the expression, the transcription of various genes. In other words, the ability of your genes now to make RNA, which then leads to the production of protein, and looking to see what could they glean from these very detailed studies about Alzheimer's disease, and could it help them to fashion an effective drug, for example. They looked at huge mountains of data and looking at all the interactions, the interactome, the exposome, all these different things that are critical, and came up with the fact that the most promising treatment of all for Alzheimer's was exercise. So it was kind of a surprise from this very detailed, very basically scientific study. And I think it just underscores the importance of moving. And of course, we all think, and I felt this way again as a scientist in a lab for years, yeah, so what? We all eat, we all sleep, we all exercise, so what? What does that really have to do with any disease? And by itself, it's not a cure for any, for any significant Alzheimer's. But as a prevention and as a part of an overall protocol, it is so critical. And in fact, for all of us who want to optimize our brain function, exercise is huge. And so there's been so much more about what type of exercise, when to do it, what the goals of it are, how long to do it, how often to do it. So it's not just about exercise as exercise. Exercise is now a relatively detailed field that can have all sorts of benefits for us.
Great. And you mentioned a good point of what different types of exercise. So do different types of exercise affect the brain differently? So for example, aerobic versus strength training?
Right. No question. And these are very much synergistic. So aerobic, very good for your blood flow, very good for your oxygenation, very good for your vascular status, and can even help your ketone level and having ketones to burn for your brain, very important. So that's a whole area unto itself. Aerobic exercise, very helpful. However, there's another area, you mentioned strength training, also in its own way, very helpful. And in fact, a couple of reasons. Number one, it gives you better insulin sensitivity. So building some muscle improves your insulin sensitivity. And in fact, insulin resistance is one of the most common risk factors for cognitive decline. So if you want optimal cognition, you want to become insulin sensitive. And many, many Americans, somewhere around 80 million Americans, are insulin resistant. It is a common problem and unfortunately not checked by most physicians. So a good thing to know about, a good thing to address, and to become insulin sensitive. The other thing, of course, is as we get a little older, many of us get a little sarcopenia. So that's a little muscle loss, and often because we're not absorbing protein well enough. So again, that's something that's relatively easy to do. Some people will end up taking some digestive enzymes. Some people will take some betaine HCl to improve the pH of their stomach, to improve the acidity needed to activate those enzymes. And so getting some protein, getting the right amount, not too much, not too little, and then doing some strength training actually turns out to be very helpful. And these things together, very helpful for so many reasons for optimizing your cognition.
Great. You use the perfect word, synergistic. So they're both beneficial on their own, but coming together makes them even better. And I think you said it right, of ultimate cognition, you want that insulin sensitivity. So that's a really good thing for me to note. So now, as far as time of day, is there an ideal time of day to get active?
Yeah, it's a great point. So a couple of points about that. Number one, a study was done to show that, if you exercise in the morning, it tends to make you sharper the rest of the day. So if you're a morning person, or if you're an afternoon person, but you can handle a little exercise in the morning, it's good to start out with some exercise. Now, not everyone can do that, not a big problem. What you don't want to do is exercise so late that it keeps you up at night. You get that adrenergic system going, you get that pulse going, you're pushing to get that optimal exercise, and that will keep you up at night if you're doing it too late in the day. So therefore, if you can do it in the morning, that's the way to go. If not, and if you're not a morning person, consider it in the early afternoon. Be careful about doing it so late in the day that you actually hurt your sleeping.
Yeah, I've learned that the hard way. I'm now a morning exerciser. So now, what about for those individuals with busy schedules? Do you have tips for fitting exercise into a busy schedule? Can you break up a workout into morning and evening? And what about those weekend warriors who don't get a lot of exercise during the week, but they go hard on the weekend? What would you have to say about them?
Yeah, please be careful. I know a lot of people will be the weekend warriors, and they'll just, they'll break out the NSAIDs to make sure, because they're always going to get inflammation. So it's better not to, biological systems for all of us, the way we think, the way we exercise, all these, we're really not meant to function in square wave jerks where you go nothing, everything. If you're going to run a marathon, then you want to practice for the marathon. You want to work up to it. And similarly, when you exercise on the weekends, great, do a little extra on the weekends, or do a lot extra, but do some during the week, because you don't want to shock your system. You'll have more joint problems. You can potentially even have more heart problems if you go from nothing to everything. So, please set some time away. Set some time off during the week. Now, you mentioned, what do you do if you have a busy schedule? Great point. And of course, we're going to get to stress down the road. Stress is an issue for our population and for so many people. And that is one of the common contributors to suboptimal cognition for all of us. When your brain is under stress, literally it will shrink. It knows that it's basically trying to pull back and protect itself. So you don't want to have super stress. To some extent, exercise is a short-term stress. What that's called is hormesis. So what you're doing is you're giving a little stress to the system, but not so much that it damages the system, and then you're allowing it to recover. So therefore, as you indicated, try to get some time. Maybe you get a few minutes in the morning. maybe you'll get a few minutes in the afternoon. And, if you've got, for example, some people like to use an Apple Watch, close your rings. You want to set it up so that you get enough movement during the day, you get enough exercise during the day to close those rings. And yes, it may be that you take a little time at lunch. It may be that you take some time when you first come home. Again, you don't want to do it so late in the day. And if you find that you're really working 24/7 and it's not possible, I remember this so well from when I was an intern, and we would be staying up all night, multiple nights per week. Horrible for your brain, horrible for your system in general. And ultimately that system has been changed, thankfully. You wouldn't have time to do the right things. And it's actually quite damaging for your health in the long run. So if you're 24/7 so that you can't exercise, then you really want to consider, how can I change my lifestyle so I'm able to have some time to exercise, able to have some time to relax, able to have some time to get good sleep.
That's a good point of looking at your life, prioritizing and finding ways to fit it in. And like you said, it doesn't have to be 0 to hero. If there's little ways that we can sprinkle it in, or walk around the block with the dogs, if you are that weekend warrior, see if there's small fragments of the day that you can sprinkle in something small throughout the week to keep that consistency. So I like that. Now, I
think many employers are recognizing this now. I think many people are realizing, hey, you're going to be there more. You're going to be sharper. That's the other thing that's so interesting to me. We have what we call normal thinking. And so that your employer thinks, okay, you're thinking normally. Nikki's here today. She's thinking normally. Well, when you've done your exercise, when you've done all the things right, you got super Nikki. You can be doing even better. And all of us really can do better as our normal selves by having the appropriate exercise and the appropriate stress management and the appropriate sleep and the appropriate nutrition. All of us can be better and actually can perform better at work.
And there's so many incredible external resources nowadays. I have a stand-up desk and a bike desk, and there's treadmills that go under the desk. So there are things available, obviously in different financial brackets, but that are accessible if we do have really busy lives. So that's neat that stuff's available as well. So for someone looking for ways to be active, where should they start? What type of exercises should they be prioritizing?
Yeah, great. I'm so glad you brought that up. The late, great Olivia Newton-John, way back in the 1980s, it was telling everyone, let's get physical. And the whole thing was about going to the gym and getting physical and all this. And we've now come all the way back to where people are realizing how critical that is. But there's a lot of new stuff, as you indicated. So we have the wearables that we didn't have before. You can track yourself with your Apple Watch or your Oura Ring or your Fitbit or any of these sorts of things. We've now got also the ability to use these restriction bands, these so-called KATSU bands or similar to KATSU bands that actually have been used by some of the Olympic athletes. These will restrict a little bit of the flow. You don't want to damage your muscle, but will restrict some flow so that you actually get more bang for your buck. We also have something called EWOT, exercise with oxygen therapy, where you're now increasing the use of your muscles, but you're also delivering oxygen. Again, for those of us who are over 40, and of course it's helpful for everybody, but for those of us who are over 40, and I'm way over 40, then you could actually make sure that you're getting oxygenation to various regions of your brain, get some really good outcomes. And we find for many people that it's helpful for optimal cognition. So again, the way to start is you want to combine the aerobics with some muscle, some strength training. Some people like to work with a physical trainer. That's great, but you don't have to do that. Some people, as you indicated, there's all sorts of stuff you can get over the internet. There's stuff you can watch on your television. You can get streaming. You can do various bicycle things, whether it's Peloton or something else. There's all sorts of great things we have access to. And by the way, there are a few communities around the country that are now trying to turn themselves into longevity communities. There's one in Ohio, in fact, that started a few years ago, where they're setting up more biking trails and more running trails and things like that to get people to be healthier and do more and kind of lure them out. And so you get this wonderful multiple effect. You get the aerobics, and you really want to get out there and do some aerobic activity. It would be best if you can do 45 minutes or so, 5 days a week. Get out there, whether it's walking hills, what have you. And one thing I would point out, for people who are trying to get optimal outcomes, sometimes people will tell me, well, yeah, I just kind of walk along a flat surface and that's it. I don't really get my heart rate up. Okay, that's a good start, and certainly great for your joints and great just to get outdoors. That's one of the benefits you get. Indoors is actually not a good place to be, unfortunately. We get exposed to mycotoxins. We get exposed to stale air. We get exposed to higher CO2 contents, which are not particularly good for your brain either. So getting outside is great, but you should work up to getting your heart rate up a little bit and get there again. 45 minutes of aerobics, 5 days a week, really good. And then combine that with at least a couple times a week of some strength training. Again, building up a little muscle, great for your glucose. It's great for your insulin sensitivity. And again, getting outside, great idea. And if you can't do that, at least get the windows open, get some outside air in. There's some interesting studies now showing that as the carbon dioxide rises, and you can get carbon dioxide meters and look at this, your cognition is not quite as good. Dr. Kat Toops, an excellent functional medicine physician, just took her meter recently on an airplane and showed that it's actually much higher than the concerning level. So we're all getting exposed when we're indoors to suboptimal conditions for so many of these reasons. And getting this exercise, getting outside, you'll notice better energy, you'll notice better cognition, you'll notice being sharper, you'll notice being faster. So all these things, check out EWAT, especially if you have any concerns with family in terms of suboptimal cognition. This is, again, a great way for optimizing your cognition. Check out the Katsu bands and related so-called restriction bands that can be very, very helpful. A lot of people who are a little older have found these bands particularly helpful for building some muscle and for getting good blood flow.
Fantastic. Well, Dr. Bredesen, thank you so much again for taking the time to discuss this fascinating topic.
Thank you, Nikki. There's so much we can all do, and just getting out there and getting started will be helpful for so many of us.
Absolutely. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
We hope all of you enjoyed our conversation today. This is just one of our 7-part series discussing key lifestyle habits that support brain health. Make sure to tune into our upcoming Facebook Live discussions with Dr. Bredesen. Follow us on Facebook at NeuroQ for updates on when and where to watch. We also covered nutrition in our last series. If you missed it, you can catch our previous Facebook Live series discussing how to support your brain health with nutrition. Supplementation is also a key part of the Bredesen 7, the 7 key lifestyle habits that support brain health. It's an easy step that goes a long way to protect your memory and think clearly. Visit NeuroQ.com to get your bottle of NeuroQ Memory and Focus, clinically shown to improve memory, boost focus, enhance mental clarity, and increase brain speed. NeuroQ Memory and Focus is also available at thousands of stores across the United States, including Sprouts, Whole Foods, Natural Grocers, Fresh Time Market, Mother's Market Kitchen, Air One, and Clark's Nutrition.